Daniel Buxton takes the first pole position of the season ahead of Jim Edwards Jr. with his teammate Rick Pearson on row 2 alongside Simon Clark. Then it's David Davies, Peter Sowerby, Jason Templeman and Mark Burton ahead of Jim Edwards Sr., Matt Jackson, Andy Thompson and Henry Taylor completing the top dozen as the lights go from red to green to start the first round of the new Renault Clio Cup. And it's Edwards who gets the jump on Buxton. Pearson trying to follow through, forcing Simon Clark wide, and it's 3 abreast for 5th place into Paddock Hill Bend. Jim Edwards Jr. in the silver car, heading the pack, then the yellow of Daniel Buxton, and cars in trouble in the background. Mark Burton and Jason Templeman slide off into the kitty litter. But at the Druids hairpin is Jim Edwards Jr., Daniel Buxton, and Buxton goes wide. Now, was he pushed by Simon Clark? But the result is the same because Buxton is now fighting to hold on to 3rd place, and it's 4 abreast behind him. Graham Hill Bend, and they all make contact. David Davies, Henry Taylor, Peter Sowerby go off, and Sowerby has not rejoined. The rest make it at the tail of the pack. But over Pilgrim's Rise, Jim Edwards Jr. leads the race as we look at a replay of that, proving that 4 into Graham Hill Bend do not go. Davies, Taylor, Sowerby all sliding off the track. Rick Pearson, a lucky escape, sliding back down the inside of the circuit. And Tim Jackson's body repair budget has just gone even higher. And the leaders already riding out through Dingle Dell. And it's Jim Edwards Jr., the man from Maidenhead. Simon Clark in 2nd place in the white Renault Clio. Then it's Buxton holding on to that 3rd place, aided by the melee behind him. And coming through in 4th place, the lucky survivor, Rick Pearson, ahead of Jim Edwards Sr., the father of the race leader. He's now running in 5th ahead of Matt Jackson, Andy Thompson and Bob Smith. Out of Stirling's Bend, heading up to Clearways and the end of the opening lap, already highly incident-packed. And this is now really turning into 3 separate races. Jim Edwards, Simon Clark and Daniel Buxton, 1, 2, 3 at the head of the field. And closing in on Buxton is the battle with Rick Pearson, Jim Edwards Sr. and Matt Jackson, 4th, 5th and 6th places. Then come the rest of the pack, literally in a race of their own. But at the moment, at the head of the field, Jim Edwards Jr. from Maidenhead, an experienced road saloon racer, raced Fiestas, Renault 5 GTs and Renault Clios. And putting the pressure on 4th place now, Rick Pearson. Behind these men comes Jim Edwards Sr. That's the pop. And he is really piling the pressure on Rick Pearson, and he's being pressurised from behind by Matt Jackson as well. 1, 2 and 3, Jim Edwards Jr., Simon Clark, Buxton in the yellow car. Looked as if he had this in the bag off the line, but that slow start really did spoil it for him. Then comes the battle for 4th, 5th and 6th, Pearson, Edwards Sr. and Matt Jackson, the 2 silver and blue cars there running just outside of the top 3 at the moment. 3 of these distinctive Markfish Motorsport cars running in the top 6 places, led by Jim Edwards Jr. Edwards Sr. started racing back in the 1960s in Mini Coopers, then moved into Formula 3 and Formula 2 racing, and he actually raced against the likes of world champions Alan Jones and Emerson Fittipaldi before he walked away from racing in the 70s, only to return again in the 80s. And he is having a great race here because Matt Jackson really is now putting the pressure on him in the number 8 car. And Jim Edwards Jr. in the number 2 car is leading the pack out of Stirling's at the end of the 2nd lap, as Simon Clark is now coming under increasing pressure from Daniel Buxton. Lifting the rear wheel ever so slightly in the air through Clearways comes the race leader Jim Edwards, makes it now onto lap number 3, but behind him the real pressure now being put on Simon Clark. It's the white car being squeezed by the lemon yellow one, and that is Daniel Buxton, the man from Northwich, driving the Chris Hodgetts Motorsport car in pursuit of the man from Long Sutton who moved up from the Fiesta Championship this season. Both Simon Clark and Daniel Buxton, very much young chargers who are aiming to make their name in touring car racing in the not too distant future. But at the moment, Jim Edwards Jr. still out in front. Meanwhile, Jim Edwards Sr. now starting to put pressure again on Rick Pearson, his teammate in the Markfish Motorsport team, running in 4th place. 1, 2 and 3, the number 9 car of Buxton. Running up 2 wheels on the curb. Climbing now up through Pilgrim's Rise, then down Pilgrim's Drop and up Hawthorne Hill to Hawthorne Bend, the classic names of the Brands Hatch Grand Prix circuit. From 6th gear, down into 4th, balancing the car through Hawthorne, onto the Minter Straight, then up to Westfield, then to perhaps the most exhilarating of the corners of all, Dingle Dell. And look at the battle for 4th place now. Jim Edwards Sr. has dived through to take that 4th place from Rick Pearson. Matt Jackson still there, holding position in 6th as the cars rise up to Dingle Dell, and a charge now again, and a great blocking move by Jim Edwards Sr. All that experience that goes back to racing Formula 2 cars here back in the 1960s, still being put to very, very good use indeed. The wily competitor raced in the British Saloon Car Championship in a Ford Capri of all cars back in the 1970s. And as the battle for 4th, 5th and 6th goes on, there's real pressure now being put on Simon Clark and Jim Edwards Jr. at the head of the field, because Daniel Buxton in the yellow car is piling the pressure on. So 2 separate battles going on. 4th, 5th and 6th come across the line. Ahead of them, the race leaders already out of Paddock Hill Bend on the way to Druids. And this is going to be a great race. Whichever way you look, there's great action going on. Up to Druids now for 4th, 5th and 6th. And it's still Jim Edwards Sr. holding off a very, very determined Rick Pearson and Matt Jackson. And up into 2nd place, the yellow car of Daniel Buxton now ahead of Simon Clark, closing in on Jim Edwards Jr. And all these 6 cars really have gone off in 2 separate races of their own now, well clear of 7th place Andy Thompson. Up through that long sweeping left-hander at Surtees, now onto the classic Pilgrim's Rise, Pilgrim's Drop. 1, 2 and 3, the yellow car at Buxton there in that 2nd place now. And Jim Edwards Sr. in 4th place, starting to pull a little bit clear of Rick Pearson, but Matt Jackson keeping very much the pressure on the 5th place man, who's weaving to try and block. Now don't forget, number 33, Rick Pearson, got involved in that melee on the opening lap, and it may be that the suspension settings have literally been bent out of adjustment, and it looks as if his car isn't handling as tidily as the number 8 car behind of Matt Jackson, and that could well be it. It's getting extra tyre wear. It's going to be a very, very tough race for Rick Pearson. Once again, moving off the line, watching his mirrors, watching Matt Jackson, trying to predict his every move, this time into the left-hander at Clearways. And Jim Edwards Sr. is getting a clear run here. He's not having to defend his racing line anymore. That's going to allow him to close in on this battle. And it's a new leader. Number 9, Buxton, dives through into the lead from Jim Edwards Jr. So the young man from Northwich now having to defend his lead. And Jim Edwards Jr. is not happy about that. He's trying to find every which way around the yellow Clio. Meanwhile, the white car still of Simon Clark holds on in that 3rd place. And just look at Jim Edwards Jr. He has not given up on this yet. He is going to fight back every inch of the way. Turns into Surtees corner, and just look at the inside rear wheel. Both the cars lift their rear wheels. The handling on these cars, much more nervous and twitchy, but much more race car-like than the previous front-wheel drive saloons that have been modified for racing. The drivers love them, and this is exactly the sort of racing that this was intended to create. Absolutely inch-perfect, flat-out, 100% motorsport. And at the head of the field still, it's Daniel Buxton from Northwich in the Chris Hodges Motorsport car, leading the Mark Fish Motorsports car of Jim Edwards Jr. through Westfield Bend, down into Dingle Dell, now up to that amazing blind corner. Both the cars flick their inside wheels in the air. But a little bit of airspace being open now. Daniel Buxton may well have got the advantage here. Uses every inch of the curbs and a little bit more at Stirling's as the cars head under the bridge and up to Clearways to the end of the lap. Balancing the car absolutely beautifully on the power. Now full power up into 6th gear along the start-finish straight. On to lap 5 of the race. And less than a second across the line separates 1st from 2nd place. Down through Paddock Hill Bend, then up Hailwood Hill, and these 3 cars still locked together in this battle that's been going on since lap 1 of the race. And using again every inch of the track out of Druids. Daniel Buxton knows that he just cannot afford to make a single mistake. He's got to drive the perfect line, the perfect corner, the perfect lap every inch of the way. And if he doesn't, Jim Edwards Jr. is going to be right there on his back bumper to take advantage. Meanwhile, Simon Clark holds on in that third place, and those top three again now starting to open up a little bit of airspace between themselves and Jim Edwards Sr. in fourth. But look in the background, marshals are running. There's been, and a huge accident. Car 23, Paul Lomax, the computer programmer from Biggin Hill, has literally crashed the program and crashed the Clio right on the middle of the Brabham Straight. That's right on the start line. It must have got out of shape through clear ways. And quite rightly, the red flags are being waved. The car blocking the track. The race is going to come to a premature end. Well, drama, but testimony, I think, to the strength of the new Clio. That is the sign of one very big accident. And thankfully, Paul Lomax there being dealt with by the doctors, just checked for concussion. He's looking okay. He walked away from the car by himself. And to our relief, Paul Lomax unhurt after what must have been a 120 miles an hour rollover in the Clio. This time it returns to its wheels in slightly more sedate fashion, but once again that budget for body panels is going to go through the roof. And that is going to be very bad news indeed for Daniel Buxton. Because Paul Lomax hadn't completed the lap to complete lap 5, the results will be calculated at the end of lap 4 of the race. And the car that crossed the line at the end of lap 4 was the car driven by Jim Edwards Jr. So Buxton's efforts were in vain. Jim Edwards Jr. is going to be crowned the first winner of the new 2000 Renault Sports Clio UK Cup. And confirmation of that then, Jim Edwards Jr. gets the result. Daniel Buxton, of course, ahead at the finish, but only under the red flag. Simon Clark third, Jim Edwards Sr. fourth, Rick Pearson fifth, and Matt Jackson sixth.
Once the car's up to temperature, i.e. tyres, the car is an absolute dream to drive. It's a proper racing car. The gearbox is superb, the handling is very twitchy, but it's a driver's car. If you can hang on to it, then you're going to be quick.
Yeah, I mean, it was a bit touch and go. The Clio is a lot more expensive, but help of the sponsor Symantec, like a computer company. They sort of helped us persuade to go to the Clios. It was really good, and Renault doing a super job so far. Just a bit gutted, not the top step of the podium, which I felt had in the bag.
Well, Buxton may not make the top step of the podium, but he's only 2 points behind Jim Edwards Jr. in the first round of the championship. Simon Clark on 25, ahead of Pops, Jim Edwards Sr. So, on the podium, it's a relieved Edwards, a disappointed Buxton, and all to play for in round 2 at Donington.